Esther, a quiet 18-year-old girl with deep brown eyes, lived a sorrowful life under the roof of her wicked aunt, Auntie Arma. After the tragic death of her parents 5 years ago, Esther was sent to Arma's small mud hut on the edge of a lively Ghanaian village. Arma was harsh and cold, always reminding Esther that feeding an extra mouth was a burden. "Esther!" Arma's sharp voice rang out early one morning. "Are you still sleeping? Do you think food will cook itself?" "I'm coming, Auntie," Esther said softly, jumping out of the thin mat she used as a bed. She rushed to the kitchen to start the fire, her stomach growling from hunger. Arma, a stout woman in her late 40s, stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips. "Hurry up and fetch water from the stream before you cook. I need my breakfast." "Yes, Auntie," Esther said, grabbing the clay pot. The stream was a good 30-minute walk, but Esther had no choice. By the time she returned, her arms ached, and the pot was digging into her shoulder. She quietly started making palm nut soup and fufu, even as her stomach churned in emptiness. The only bright spot in Esther's life was Kelvin, her boyfriend, and her greatest source of comfort. Kelvin, an apprentice at the village shoemaker's shop, was tall and strong, with a cheerful face that could lift Esther's spirits even on her darkest days. After her morning chores, Esther often found time to sneak to the shop to see him. That day she caught him working on a pair of shoes under a mango tree. "Esther!" Kelvin exclaimed with a wide grin. "You look tired. Did Auntie Arma make you carry the whole stream home again?" Esther chuckled softly. "Something like that, but I'm fine." Kelvin shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "One day, Esther, I will take you away from all this suffering. You'll live in a house where no one shouts at you, and you'll never have to do so much tiring chores again." Esther's cheeks flushed. "You always say that, Kelvin." "I mean it," Kelvin said, holding her hand gently. "I'm saving up. Soon I'll marry you, and we'll start our own family." Kelvin's unwavering love gave Esther hope, and their bond grew stronger every day. Kelvin's mother, Mama Grace, was a kind widow in her 50s. She lived in a small, neat hut not far from the shoemaker's shop. Whenever Esther visited, Mama Grace greeted her with a warm smile. "Esther, my dear, you've come to help again," Mama Grace said as Esther arrived that afternoon. "Yes, Ma, let me sweep the compound for you," Esther said, grabbing the broom. Mama Grace nodded approvingly. "You'll make a fine wife for Kelvin. God bless you, my daughter." Esther blushed and bent her head, focusing on her task. Though Mama Grace's home was simple, it felt like a palace compared to Auntie Arma's house. Back at home, Arma sat on her wooden stool, watching Esther work in the yard. She knew about Esther's relationship with Kelvin and couldn't have cared less. In fact, Arma encouraged it, secretly pleased that her niece had chosen a poor shoemaker's apprentice as her boyfriend. "Let her date that poor boy," Arma muttered to herself. "He's just the type of man she deserves. The sooner they marry, the sooner I can be free of her." Unlike most guardians who might worry about their ward's future, Arma saw Kelvin as the perfect escape plan. To her, their relationship was a blessing in disguise. As the sun set on another tiring day, Esther held on to Kelvin's promises and Mama Grace's kindness, hoping for a better future. But the village had its own way of twisting lives, and as she lay on her mat that night, staring at the flickering lantern light, she whispered to herself, "Maybe Kelvin is right. Maybe one day things will get better." Kelvin's life had always been simple, learning the craft of shoemaking from his master and spending stolen moments with Esther under the mango tree. But his trip to the city changed everything. His master had entrusted him with an important delivery, goods meant for a big company. This was the biggest deal his master had secured in a long time, and Kelvin couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The pressure weighed on him, but he was determined to complete the task without disappointing the man who had taught him everything. In the city, he met Natasha, a wealthy young woman who was the owner of the company he was sent to do the delivery. Natasha was immediately drawn to Kelvin's rugged good looks and quiet charm. She found reasons to speak to him whenever she could, her interest in him growing stronger by the day. "You're too handsome to be a shoemaker," she teased one afternoon, handing him an expensive-looking wristwatch. Kelvin forced a polite smile. "Thank you, Mom, but I can't accept this." He tried to brush off her advances, thinking of Esther back in the village. But Natasha was relentless. "Why stay in a village when you could live a life of wealth and ease?" she asked, her eyes glinting with interest. When Kelvin returned to the village, Natasha began visiting him there too. Her flashy clothes and confident demeanor quickly caught the attention of the townsfolk. Mama Grace, impressed by Natasha's wealth and boldness, saw an opportunity. "Kelvin, this girl clearly likes you," Mama Grace said one evening. "Don't be a fool. She can give you a better life." Kelvin frowned. "But Ma, what about Esther? I love her." "Love won't feed you," Mama Grace replied sharply. "Think about your future. Natasha is persistent, and she's wealthy. Do you want to fix shoes forever?" Kelvin began to waver. Natasha continued visiting, bringing him gifts and making him feel important. The idea of a wealthy life in the city started to appeal to him, and his thoughts toward Esther began to change. One evening, as Esther sat beside him under the mango tree, she noticed Kelvin's distant expression. "Kelvin, you've been so quiet lately. Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Kelvin sighed, his eyes avoiding hers. "Esther, we can't be together anymore. I've decided to leave for the city with Natasha." Esther's heart dropped. "What? Kelvin, how can you say that? After everything we've been through?" "I need to think about my future," Kelvin said coldly. "Natasha can give me a life you never could." Tears streamed down Esther's face. "Kelvin, I love you. We planned our life together. Please don't do this." "It's over, Esther," Kelvin replied, standing up. "Don't hold me back." The next day, Kelvin packed his bags and left for the city with Natasha, leaving Esther heartbroken and abandoned. She felt like her whole world had come crashing down. As the news of Kelvin's betrayal spread through the village, Aunt Arma wasted no time mocking Esther. "What did you expect, huh?" Arma sneered. "That a poor shoemaker's son would stay loyal to a nobody like you? Be thankful he didn't leave sooner." Life became even harder for Esther after Kelvin's departure. She threw herself into chores, trying to distract herself from the pain. But as the weeks turned into months, she noticed changes in her body. Her aunt, Arma, was the first to confront her. "Why are you getting lazy, huh? And why do you look like you've been eating more than your share?" Arma snapped one morning. Esther hesitated but finally admitted, "Auntie, I think I'm pregnant." Arma's face turned red with anger. "Pregnant? In my house? You shameless girl! Pack your things and leave. I won't have people gossiping about me because of you." Esther tried to plead with her, but Arma wouldn't listen. She threw Esther's belongings outside that day and slammed the door shut. Desperate, and with nowhere else to go, Esther decided to seek help from Mama Grace. She arrived at the small house and knocked on the door, clutching her bag tightly. When Mama Grace opened the door, she frowned. "What are you doing here?" "Ma, please help me," Esther begged. "I'm pregnant, with Kelvin's child. I have nowhere else to go." Mama Grace's eyes narrowed. "Pregnant? With my son's child? Don't lie to me, you shameless girl. Kelvin left for the city months ago." "It's the truth, Ma, I swear," Esther said, tears streaming down her face. "Stop embarrassing yourself," Mama Grace spat. "Go find the father of your child and stop trying to pin this on my son." Esther's heart shattered again. "Ma, please, I have no one else to turn to." "Get out of my sight!" Mama Grace shouted, slamming the door in Esther's face. With nowhere to go, Esther wandered the village aimlessly, her bag slung over her shoulder. She eventually sat under a large baobab tree, her body trembling from exhaustion and despair. An elderly woman named Nana Efwa happened to pass by and noticed Esther's tear-streaked face. "Child, what's wrong?" Nana Efwa asked gently. Through her sobs, Esther explained everything: Kelvin's betrayal, her pregnancy, and being thrown out by her aunt and Mama Grace. Nana Efwa reached into her wrapper and pulled out a small bundle of money. "Take this, child. Use it to buy food and shelter. The world may be harsh, but you must stay strong." Esther looked at the old woman with gratitude. Thank you, Nana. I don't know what I would have done without your kindness. Nana Efua patted her shoulder. Life has a way of testing us. But remember, every storm eventually passes. Keep moving forward. As Esther clutched the money and stared at the horizon, she knew her battle was far from over. But deep inside, she resolved to fight for herself and her unborn child. With her baby growing inside her, Esther gathered her courage and decided to leave the village. She used the money Nana Efua gave her to travel to the city, a place she had only heard about in stories. But the city was nothing like she imagined. Tall buildings loomed over narrow, crowded streets. Esther found herself in a bustling market where people shoved past each other, shouting and bargaining. With just a few cedis left, she managed to rent a tiny room in a slum, a space barely large enough for her to stretch her legs. The air was thick with the smell of garbage, and rats scurried in the shadows. Esther cried herself to sleep every night, clutching her growing belly and whispering, "I'll protect you, my child, no matter what." Determined to survive, Esther started selling sachet water on the streets. Each day she walked under the blazing sun, balancing the heavy tray on her head. "Pure water! Ice-cold water!" she shouted, her voice growing hoarse. Sometimes, kind strangers bought her entire stock. Other times, people pushed past her as though she didn't exist. Her feet were blistered, and her back ached, but she refused to give up. One evening, as Esther counted her earnings, she realized the money wasn't enough to cover her rent and food. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "How much longer can I do this?" The next day, Esther's luck seemed to run out. While crossing a busy street, a sleek black car sped toward her. The loud honk startled her, and she froze. The car skidded to a stop, barely missing her. Her tray of water sachets crashed to the ground as she collapsed in fear. "Oh my goodness!" a man's voice called out. The driver, a tall, well-dressed man, rushed out of the car. "Are you all right?" Esther tried to respond but fainted. A small crowd gathered, murmuring about her condition. "She's pregnant," an old woman said. "She needs help." The driver, Benjamin, carried Esther into his car and drove her to the nearest hospital. Hours later, she woke up in a clean hospital bed. A nurse smiled at her. "You're lucky that man brought you here," she said. Esther turned her head and saw Benjamin sitting nearby. His face was filled with worry. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you. What were you doing selling water in your condition?" Esther's voice trembled as she replied, "I have no one. I've been left alone to survive." Benjamin's expression softened. He thought of his late mother, who had struggled as a single parent. "Do you have a safe place to stay?" he asked. Esther nodded hesitantly. "I live in a small room in the slum." Moved by her story, Benjamin made a decision. "You can't stay there. Come live with me. I have a big house and you'll be safe." Esther hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You won't be," Benjamin insisted. "You can help me with cooking and keeping the house. Think of it as a partnership." With no other options, Esther agreed. Benjamin took her to his home, a spacious modern house in a quiet neighborhood. The sight of it overwhelmed her. This can't be for me," she said softly. "It's for both of us," Benjamin replied. "Now let's get you settled." In the days that followed, Esther worked hard to repay Benjamin's kindness. She prepared meals, cleaned the house, and even arranged flowers for the dining table. Benjamin, who often buried himself in work, began looking forward to their conversations over dinner. One night, as they ate jollof rice and grilled chicken, Benjamin asked, "What will you do after the baby comes?" Esther paused, her hand resting on her belly. "I want to give my child a better life. I'll work as hard as I can." Benjamin nodded. "You're strong, Esther. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." For the first time in months, Esther felt a glimmer of hope. She began to believe that she and her baby could have a future, a new beginning. Esther's labor pains started early one morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her belly and gasping for air. "The baby's coming," she whispered, tears of both fear and hope streaming down her face. Benjamin heard her cries and rushed into her room. "Hold on, Esther," "I'll take you to the hospital," he said, helping her to the car. The drive to the hospital was tense. Benjamin kept glancing at Esther, whose face was pale but determined. "You're going to be okay," he reassured her, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Hours later, the sound of a baby's cry filled the hospital room. Esther looked at her newborn son, tears of joy running down her cheeks. "John," she whispered. "Your name is John." Benjamin, standing by her side, smiled warmly. "Welcome to the world, John," he said, his voice soft. From that moment, he treated the baby as if he were his own. Back at Benjamin's house, he quickly took on the role of a father figure to little John. Whether it was rocking the baby to sleep, singing silly songs, or buying toys, Benjamin was always there. Esther often found herself watching him from the corner of the room. There was something deeply touching about the way he cradled John, his big hands so gentle. Her heart would skip a beat, and she realized she had started to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Love. One evening, as Benjamin held John in his lap, making the baby laugh with funny faces, Esther quietly whispered to herself, "How can one man care so much for a child that isn't even his?" Her admiration for Benjamin grew each day, but she kept her feelings to herself, unsure if he felt the same way. One evening, Benjamin sat down beside Esther after putting John to sleep. "You've been working so hard for John, Esther. What about you? What do you dream of doing?" he asked, his voice soft. Esther hesitated. "I've always wanted to sew, but it feels like a silly dream now." Benjamin smiled. "It's not silly. It's your passion, and I want to help you achieve it." The next week, Benjamin enrolled Esther in a sewing class. She was nervous at first, but as her fingers moved over the fabric, she felt alive again. Her teacher often praised her. "Esther, you have a gift," the teacher said one day. "You should start your own shop." Excited, Esther shared the idea with Benjamin. "Do you think I could really do it?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. "I don't just think so, I know so," Benjamin said confidently. "We'll make it happen together." Months passed, and Esther's little sewing workshop began to thrive. Customers loved her designs, and word quickly spread. Benjamin supported her every step of the way, from helping her find supplies to watching John when she was busy. One quiet evening, after a long day, Benjamin and Esther sat on the porch. The cool night air wrapped around them, and the stars twinkled in the sky. "You've done so much for me and John," Esther began, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me," Benjamin replied. "You've brought life into this house. John's laughter and your courage remind me of what truly matters." As they spoke, Esther's heart raced. She glanced at Benjamin, realizing just how deeply she had come to care for him. How could someone be so kind, so selfless? She wondered silently. But she said nothing about her feelings, choosing instead to enjoy the warmth of the moment. The buzz of the sewing machine filled the room as Esther finished the final stitch on a dazzling outfit. Her small workshop was alive with activity. Customers chatting, fabrics being cut, and laughter echoing. Esther's hard work and talent had paid off, and her first fashion show was just days away. On the day of the show, the event hall was packed. Models strutted down the runway wearing Esther's vibrant designs, a blend of traditional African patterns and modern styles. The audience clapped and cheered. Esther, standing backstage, couldn't believe it. She wiped away a tear as one of her designs got a standing ovation. After the show, Benjamin walked up to her, holding a bouquet of flowers. "You were amazing, Esther," he said, his eyes filled with pride. That evening, Benjamin invited Esther to a special dinner. She hesitated at first, thinking about John, but Benjamin assured her, "I've already arranged for someone to watch him. You deserve a break." The restaurant was beautiful, with soft candlelight and gentle music playing in the background. Esther felt nervous as she sat across from Benjamin. He seemed unusually quiet, fidgeting with his fork. "Esther," Benjamin finally began, looking her straight in the eyes, "you've brought so much joy into my life. Watching you succeed, seeing how you care for John, it's made me realize something." Esther's heart raced. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I love you, Esther. Will you marry me?" he asked, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. Esther's hands flew to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Benjamin, I will marry you," she exclaimed. The restaurant erupted into applause as Benjamin slipped the ring onto her finger. Their wedding was a beautiful celebration, held in a lush garden filled with colorful flowers. Esther wore a stunning gown she had designed herself, and John, now a playful toddler, served as the ring bearer. As Esther walked down the aisle, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Her journey had been filled with pain and struggles, but here she was, surrounded by love and happiness. Benjamin stood at the altar, his face glowing with joy. "You look breathtaking," he whispered when she reached him. "And you look perfect," Esther replied, smiling through her tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. As they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed Esther tenderly, sealing their union with love and hope. After the wedding, life became even more fulfilling. Esther's fashion business continued to grow, and Benjamin became her biggest supporter. Together, they built a life filled with laughter, hard work, and dreams. John adored Benjamin, calling him Daddy without hesitation. Watching them together warmed Esther's heart every day. She often thought back to the moment when she had felt so alone and hopeless, realizing how far she had come. One evening, as they sat on their porch, Benjamin turned to Esther. "I told you that you deserved more, and look at you now," he said with a smile. "And I wouldn't have gotten here without you," Esther replied, squeezing his hand. Their life was far from perfect, but it was filled with love, and for Esther, that was all she had ever wanted. It's been 6 years since Kelvin left the village to the city. Kelvin leaned back in his plush chair, a smug smile on his face. Life with Natasha was everything he had ever dreamed of. Fancy cars, expensive clothes, and exotic vacations. He felt invincible, surrounded by wealth and luxury. He never thought about Esther and the life he left behind. "Kelvin, darling," Natasha called from the living room. "We're hosting a big party this weekend. Don't forget to invite your friends." Kelvin waved her off, pouring himself a drink. The attention and admiration that came with their wealth made him feel on top of the world. Yet he ignored the small cracks starting to show. Natasha often took secretive phone calls, whispering in a hushed voice and pacing the room. Kelvin didn't ask questions. To him, as long as the money kept coming, everything else could wait. One peaceful evening, the calm was shattered by the sound of sirens. Police cars screeched to a halt outside their grand mansion, and officers barged in with authority. "What's going on?" Kelvin yelled, alarmed. "Kelvin Mensah and Natasha Ofori, you are under arrest for fraud and money laundering," the lead officer declared, cuffing their hands. Kelvin's face turned pale. "What? This must be a mistake. I didn't do anything. Natasha, please tell them I'm innocent." However, Natasha remained silent. Her head hung low. She knew the truth. Her wealth had been built on illegal dealings, and now the law had caught up with her. Kelvin, swept up in her lies, was now implicated in the crimes. The police confiscated everything: the house, the cars, and the jewelry. Kelvin and Natasha were thrown into separate cells to await their trial. Meanwhile, back in the village, Mama Grace had become the talk of the town. With Kelvin's gifts, her home had transformed into the grandest house in the area. Over the years, she had strutted through the village, her nose in the air, ignoring the people who once helped her. But news of Kelvin's arrest soon reached the village and spread quickly. Villagers gathered to gossip about the downfall of the once proud family. When Mama Grace went to plead for help, she found nothing but cold shoulders. "Nana, please," she begged the village chief, tears streaming down her face. "You have to help my son. He's innocent." The chief sighed deeply. "Mama Grace, you pushed everyone away with your arrogance. No one here wants to testify for Kelvin, And honestly, no one wants to get involved with such a shady case. The police are involved. It's too risky. Mama Grace's pride crumbled. She returned to her grand house, but it now felt empty and cold. Overwhelmed by stress and shame, she suffered a stroke, leaving her unable to speak or move properly. Her wealth became meaningless as she spent her days in silence, with no one to care for her. Kelvin clung to a sliver of hope during his trial, expecting someone from the village to come forward and defend him. But no one showed up. His arrogance and selfishness had alienated the very people he now needed. "The evidence is clear," the judge declared sternly. "Kelvin Mensah, you are sentenced to life imprisonment for your involvement in fraud and money laundering." Kelvin's legs buckled as the weight of the sentence sank in. The wealth and luxury he had chased had vanished, leaving him to face a grim future behind bars. He was filled with regrets and wished he could turn back time. Thank you for joining us on this amazing journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. Let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? See you in the next story.